Hey there, Bible nerds. Welcome back to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. Today we are diving into Job chapters 16 through 20. And y'all, the group chat has officially become toxic. If it hasn't already, but this is more toxic than it ever was. So if you remember where we left off, Eliphaz had just finished another speech basically telling Job, like, sir, righteous people do not suffer like this, so there must be something you're not telling us, right? And Job is exhausted, physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, spiritually exhausted, and most importantly, exhausted from listening to these so-called friends talk. So Chapter 16 through 20 takes us deeper into second round of speeches between Job and his friends, quote unquote friends. But underneath all of the arguing, something incredible is happening. So Job is wrestling with God. He is confused by God. He feels abandoned by God. Sometimes he even says things about God that are coming straight out of his pain rather than a complete understanding of what God is actually doing. But Job still keeps reaching toward God. So go ahead and grab your drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. I have water and my energy drink. Take a sip of my energy drink before we get started. Ooh, okay. Excuse me. All right, so Job begins the chapter by responding to Eliphaz, and he does not ease into it, which good for him, right? Because none of his friends eased in anyways. So he essentially says, I've heard all this before. Then he calls them like miserable comforters. He already called them that, I believe, in the previous chapters. And honestly, it is very accurate, right? These men originally traveled to Job because they heard about his suffering. When they first saw him, they cried with him. They tore their robes because that's how you show, grief and mourning and all that back in the day. And then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days without saying anything. They just kind of like stayed there with him, right? Quietly, silently for 7 days, right? Mourned with him, grieved with him. And that was probably the best ministry they gave Job. Because once they started talking, everything went downhill. Job asks how long their speeches are going to continue. He basically wants to know, do y'all have an ending plan, or are we just gonna do this, back and forth forever? Like, what's the plan here? Is this it? Like, are we just gonna do this forever? And then Job makes an important point. He tells them that if their positions were reversed, he could easily give speeches too. He could shake his head, he could criticize them, he could sit comfortably outside their suffering and explain what they must have done wrong. But Job says that instead he would use his mouth to encourage them and his words to bring them relief. That right there is a lesson. Knowing the correct theological principle is not the same thing as knowing how to care for a hurting person. I'm going to say that again. Knowing the correct theological principle is not the same thing as knowing how to care for a hurting person. Period. Sometimes people need truth. Sometimes people need correction. And sometimes they need you to close your theological PowerPoint presentation and sit beside them quietly. Period. Job continues by explaining that talking does not relieve his pain, but remaining silent does not relieve it either. Basically, talking hurts, silence hurts, existing hurts. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. That's pretty much the gist of what Job said, yeah. Then Job turns his attention toward God, and he gets uncomfortable. Well, it gets uncomfortable. Um, Job describes himself as worn out. His household has been devastated. His body has become so thin and damaged that his physical condition itself seems to testify against him, right? Remember, Job does not know what we know. And what do we know? We got the behind the scene information in chapters 1 and 2. We know Satan accused Job of only worshiping God because God had blessed him. We know God permitted, the testing. Job knows none of that. From Job's perspective, everything happened under God's authority, so Job begins interpreting his suffering as though God himself has become his enemy. He describes God as tearing at him in anger. He feels attacked. He describes people mocking him, striking him, and gathering against him. He says God has handed him over to the ungodly. Then he describes what his life used to be like. He had been comfortable, secure, then suddenly everything shattered. Job uses violent imagery. He feels as though God grabbed him, crushed him, made him a target, and repeatedly struck him. That language is intense because his suffering is intense. And this is one of those places where we need to understand the difference between the Bible accurately recording what someone says and the Bible saying that person's interpretation is completely correct. Job genuinely feels attacked by God. But, yeah, let me take a sip. My throat is kind of empty. Ooh, lemon water. Good stuff. All right, so where was I? So Job feels attacked. He genuinely feels that he's attacked, but Job cannot see the heavenly conversation that we saw. He didn't see that. He does not know that. His theology is being processed through grief, and grief is loud. Job says he has sewn sackcloth over his skin and buried his face in dust. His face is red from crying, and darkness surrounds his eyes. Yet he still insists that his hands have not been violent and that his prayer is pure. Translation, he pretty much says, I know I'm not perfect, but I did not secretly commit some horrible crime that explains all of this. That has been his argument this entire time. His friends keep saying otherwise, right? Like, yeah. And then Job keeps saying, then show me the sin. And nobody can. None of them can. Then something starts shifting. Job cries for the earth not to cover his blood, meaning he does not want his suffering or his cry for justice to disappear without being heard. So he just doesn't want to die anymore. He wants to be heard, pretty much. And suddenly Job says that even now he believes he has a witness in heaven. So think about it. He feels attacked by God, yet simultaneously believes his ultimate witness is in heaven. His friends are against him. His body is failing. His life has collapsed. But Job believes somebody is in heaven, knows the truth. He longs for someone to plead with God on behalf of a human being, like one person might plead for another. Job wants an advocate, a mediator, someone who knows Job completely and can represent himself before God. Job does not yet have the full revelation Christians have about Jesus, because this is way before Christ. Job's son was way before Christ and way before the prophets prophesied about a Messiah coming, actually. So, yeah. But his longing points towards something Scripture will reveal far more clearly later. Humanity needs someone who can stand between sinful humanity and a holy God. And this chapter ends with Job believing his years are running out and that he is approaching a journey from which, from this, earthly perspective, he will not return. Dark chapter. Why did I say it like that? Dark chapter. But even inside the darkness, there is a tiny light. Job still believes heaven knows his case. So one of the biggest lessons from this chapter is simple. You can speak truth and still be terrible at comforting people. I feel like that's the lesson for every chapter so far on the book of Job. Job's friends had pieces of correct theology. God is just, sin matters, wickedness has consequences. Their problem was assuming they understood everything God was doing. Nobody will ever, honestly, understand everything that God has done, is doing, and will be doing. Period. Anyway, so fun fact corner. Not really fun, just something. Job's description of wanting a heavenly witness and I've already said this, but Job's description of wanting a heavenly witness and someone to plead his case is important because the theme of a mediator has been developing throughout Job, actually. Earlier, he wished someone could stand between himself and God, and now that longing becomes even stronger. The remarkable part is that Job keeps searching for his answer in the same direction, upward, upward, upward. He may be confused about God and he's feeling all these things, heavy emotions, but he still believes his ultimate vindication must somehow come from God. And that's how we all should be. All right, chapter 17. This chapter continues Job's speech, and immediately we know his emotional condition has not improved. Job says his spirit is broken, his days feel shortened, and the grave appears to be waiting for him. There's no motivational poster happening here. No good vibes only. Job has exactly 0 good vibes remaining. He looks around and sees mockers. The men who were supposed to comfort him have become another source of suffering. Then Job makes this fascinating request. He asks God himself to provide the security or pledge that Job needs. In other words, he basically says, God, you are going to have to guarantee my case because nobody else can. His friends cannot do it for sure. His reputation cannot do it. His possession definitely cannot do it because they're gone. His health cannot do it. His health is deteriorating. Job needs God. And this is wild because Job is simultaneously frustrated with God and depending on him at the same time. Like everything in here is so ironic. Like imagine kind of asking God why he did this to you, but also asking God for help at the same time to help you at the same time. So anyway, so yeah. So it sounds contradictory, right? Until you have actually experienced deep faith during suffering, or if you just have deep faith in general, because everything happens for a reason. God knows everything. He knows, he's all knowing, right? So he knows why this happened to you. Why did he let this happen to you? And then at the same time, you're asking God to help you in the situation. So yeah, so sometimes the person you are crying to is the same God you are crying about. So Job says his friends lack understanding and believes they will not ultimately triumph. Then he describes how publicly humiliating his suffering has become. He has become something people talk about. His eyes are weak from grief. His body is reduced. People are shocked by what they see. Yet in the middle of all of this hopeless language, Job says something surprising. He says the righteous will continue in their ways, and those with clean hands will grow stronger. So, hold up, sir. 30 seconds ago, we were decorating the grave. Now we're talking about perseverance. This is Job. His emotions move back and forth because suffering is not tidy. He can be hopeless in one moment and faithful in the next. He can say, I'm not finished, and then 5 verses later says, oh, the righteous keep going. So that is actually extremely very human. Job then challenges his friends again. He basically tells them to come back and try another argument because he still has not found wisdom among them, which makes him a really good friend, right? Because even if it were me, like if my friends talk to me the way his friends talk to him, that would be it. Like that's the end of it. Like setting boundaries. Bye. Bye forever. Like you cannot talk to me like that. Like what in the world? But guess what? He takes the high road. But so the shade continues. This man is grieving, covered in sores, and still somehow has enough energy to roast all three friends. Which good for him. Respectfully impressive. Um, yeah, I applaud him for that. Honestly, like I'm actually very proud of him for that. His friends have been telling him that if he changes course, darkness can become light. But Job sees darkness ahead. He expects the grave. He describes the grave almost like a home waiting for him. He imagines calling corruption, his father and the worm, his mother. Wait, he imagines calling corruption his father and the worm his mother or sister. Does that make sense? So Job has officially reached the worms are my family now. Okay, so this book does not play. Then comes the painful question, where is his hope? Who can see hope for him? Will hope descend with him into the grave? Will he and his hope disappear into the dust together? Job is wrestling with whether there is anything beyond the darkness he can currently see. And remember this, because this chapter or the next chapter is coming, which you know, I'll talk about it. But right now, Job is asking, where is my hope? Soon he's going to answer his own question in a way that is absolutely beautiful. Okay, that was a very quick chapter. Now, fun fact corner. So the chapter contains another legal image. When Job asks God to provide the pledge or security he needs, he is using language associated with someone guaranteeing an obligation. Job has reached a point where he believes no human being can guarantee his case. He needs God to somehow provide the answer himself. The theme of God providing what Job cannot provide becomes extremely important as the book, as the story develops. Well, or the real story. I always want to correct myself whenever I say that because this is history. This happened. So when I say book, I feel like I'm making it less than it is. Like it's just a story about, but this is history. Anyways, I'm kidding. Anyways, I digress. All right. So, chapter 18. Now Bildad speaks because apparently nobody learned anything. Bildad begins by asking Job when he plans to stop talking. How about you, Bildad? When are you going to stop talking? Hilarious. Because Job literally asked him the same question in chapter 16, right? So we have reached the phase of argument where everyone is saying, no, you talk too much. No, you talk too much. Biblical maturity is thriving. Bildad is offended because Job has treated his friends as though they are foolish, which is so ironic. But anyways, he asks why Job considers them stupid or like animals. That's even nothing compared to what they've said to him. At least they said it to his face. That's always good, but still, and then he accuses Job of tearing himself apart with anger. And Bildad essentially asks, do you expect the entire moral order of the universe to change just because you do not like our explanation? Who asked you? Who will... Anyways. These three guys, they aggravate me. Here is Bildad's logic. God is just, the wicked suffer, Job is suffering terribly, therefore, ... right? Bildad has taken a general biblical principle and turned it into an absolute formula. All three of them, they've turned it into an absolute formula. All three of them think the same, which is weird, because how are they all friends when one person thinks differently from them? But anyways, people still do this though, even to this day and age. If you follow God, everything will go well. If something went wrong, you must not have done enough you must not have enough faith. If you're suffering financially, you must have made bad choices. If your relationship failed, you must have missed God. If you are sick, you must have done something spiritually wrong. That's usually what people think because they like to judge everything, right? But no, life is more complicated, way more complicated than that. And it's not as easy as that. Like, oh, excuse me. Um, so Job itself exists partly to destroy that kind of simplistic theology. Bildad then launches into a long description of what happens to wicked people. He says the wicked person's light will go out. The flame in his tent will disappear, his steps will weaken. Then Bildad starts describing traps, lots of traps. A net catches the wicked person's feet, a snare grabs him, a trap waits on the path. Something is waiting everywhere he turns. It is basically the ancient Near Eastern version of Home Alone, except nobody is laughing at Bildad. And Bildad thinks Kevin McAllister is divine judgment. Then terror surrounds the wicked person. Calamity waits nearby. His strength disappears. His skin is consumed. He is dragged away from the security of his tent and brought before what Bildad calls the king of terrors, meaning death. His home is destroyed, his roots drop below, his branches wither above, his memory disappears from the earth. He's driven from light to darkness. He has no descendants, no survivors. People are horrified by his fate. And Bildad concludes that this is what happens to the wicked, specifically someone who does not know God. Now, think carefully about what Bildad has just described. A man loses his children, his household collapses, his health deteriorates, his body is consumed, his home is gone, terror surrounds him. Does that sound familiar? Bildad is not speaking abstractly with his example. He is describing Job point by point. And the cruelest part might be his comments about the wicked person having no descendants. Job had 10 children, they all died. Like, imagine sitting beside a grieving father and basically telling him, like, wicked men lose their children. Like, sir, please go home. Go home, leave right now. Like, can you believe? Bildad believes he is defending God. But God never asked Bildad to accuse Job. In fact, readers already know something Bildad does not. Us readers, right? At the beginning of the book, God himself described Job as blameless and upright. So Bildad is confidently arguing something about Job that contradicts information God already gave us. Which is funny because there's these so-called friends. They should know this about him. But no. Oh, hi, Babs. All right, where was I? So this chapter teaches us to be extremely careful when applying biblical principles to somebody else's circumstances. And I've been saying this over and over all throughout, the chapters so far. Bildad says several things about wickedness that are true in a general sense. He's generalizing, like sin destroys, evil has consequences, blah, blah, blah. But a true principle applied incorrectly can become a lie about somebody. We are not God. We rarely know the entire story behind another person's suffering. Compassion should make us slower to accuse and quicker to listen. So fun fact corner. Let's see. Bildad uses several different images for traps in this chapter. He talks about nets, snares, and hidden traps along a path. That imagery reinforces his belief that wicked people eventually become trapped by their own choices. But there is some serious irony here. Bildad thinks Job has been caught by wickedness, and I just mentioned this. So while us who've read the book know that Job's suffering began precisely because his faithfulness became the subject of the heavenly challenge. Bildad sees evidence. He just interprets all of it incorrectly. It's not even evidence because he doesn't really know the truth. So, anyways, yeah. It wasn't even a fun fact or a fact. I just wanted to say it. All right, chapter 19. This one. This is the chapter. Chapter 19. Job responds to Bildad by asking how long these men are going to torment him and crush him with words. He says they have repeatedly reproached him, and even if Job had made some mistakes, he says that would still not justify them humiliating him, right? They're his friends. Then Job again expresses his belief that God has surrounded him and allowed this disaster. He cries out that he has been wronged, but receives no answer, and that is really one of his deepest wounds. It is not just that he lost money, not just that he lost property, not even just his wealth. Job feels like heaven has gone silent. He cries out, but hears nothing. He says his path has been blocked. Darkness covers his road. His honor has been stripped away. His crown has been removed. He feels demolished from every side. His hope has been uprooted like a tree. Job again uses the language of warfare, describing God's forces, surrounding him as though he were an enemy. And then he describes the human isolation surrounding him. This part is brutal. His family is distant. People who knew him have become estranged. His relatives are gone. His closest friends have forgotten him, and his, I guess, best friends are the worst. Guests and servants treat him like strangers. Even when he calls a servant, he gets no response. His wife is repulsed by his breath. His family finds him offensive. Even little boys mock him. And his best friends, so-called, best friends, literally detest him. People he loved have turned against him, and physically, Job says he is essentially skin and bones. This man has lost everything people normally use to define stability, like children, money, property, health, social standing, community, support system, and seemingly his sense of closeness with God. Then Job looks at these men who came to comfort him and begs them, "Have pity on me, please." Because from Job's perspective, God's hand has struck him. He asks why they are persecuting him. Basically, is that what I am already going, or is what I am going through not enough for you? Then something changes. Oh, that made me emotional. Okay. Suck it in. Tears go back inside. Okay. Job says he wishes his words could be recorded, written down, preserved permanently, engraved into rock. My guy wanted permanent documentation, and guess what? Thousands of years later, hello, here I am now talking about it. We are literally sitting here discussing his words. Guess what, Job? Your request has been granted, and so far, since your time, millions and millions and millions of people have read your words. Then comes one of the most powerful moments in Job. Job declares with certainty that his Redeemer lives. Not I hope, not maybe, not if everything works out. He knows. Job believes that ultimately his Redeemer will stand upon the earth, and even after Job's body is destroyed, he expects somehow to see God. Job says he himself will see him with his own eyes, and his heart longs for that moment. Me too, Job. Me too. Do you understand how wild that declaration is, considering where we were just, 2 chapters ago. So, yeah. So in chapter 17, he's like, "Where's my hope?" And then chapter 19, he says, "My Redeemer lives." The situation has not changed. Let me just say that again. Nothing changed. It got worse, if anything. Nothing around Job has changed. No children have come back. His wealth has not returned. His sword, nothing. Everything is exactly as it was when he was suffering. God has not, explained chapters 1 and 2 to him. There has been no visible breakthroughs, but not even with his friends, but something happened inside Job's faith. Job realizes that his final hope is not being understood by Bildad. It is not in getting Eliphaz to admit he's wrong. It is not rebuilding his reputation. His hope is that somewhere beyond everything he currently sees, there is a living Redeemer who knows the truth and will ultimately vindicate him. The Hebrew idea of a redeemer includes the concept of a defender or family representative who steps in to protect someone's rights and secure justice. Job believes he has one. And Christians, and people reading the whole Bible cannot miss how beautifully this longing ultimately points toward Jesus, the living Redeemer, the mediator Job longed for, the advocate, the one who enters human suffering instead of merely explaining it from a distance. This is why chapter 19 hits so hard. Job's faith is not beautiful because life is beautiful, because, it's hard. His life is beautiful because everything looks horrible and he still reaches for God. Isn't that so beautiful? That is so beautiful. Then Job turns back toward his friends. He warns them to be careful. If they continue persecuting him, assuming his suffering proves his guilt, they themselves should fear judgment. And he fears for his friends too. Because judgment belongs to God. Job has moved from begging them to pity him to warning them that their accusations are not harmless. Words matter. Words are actually very strong. And God sees how we treat people who are already hurting. So this chapter might be one of the clearest pictures in scripture of faith surviving without immediate answer. We often imagine faith like this, problem, prayer, breakthrough, testimony, roll credits. Sometimes it looks like that. Sometimes it looks like this. So problem, prayer, silence, more prayer, more confusion, still trusting. Job has not received his answers yet, but he anchors himself to what he believes about the one who will ultimately have the final word. That matters for us. Your confidence in God cannot depend entirely on understanding what he is doing right now, or what he has done, or what he will be doing, because sometimes you will not understand. Actually, oftentimes, not just sometimes, more often than not, we don't understand, right? Job's faith says, "I cannot explain this chapter of my life, but I know who ultimately holds my story." That is mature faith. Just trust, even if you're in the most difficult part of your life. And sometimes it's hard to grasp that, right? Like to even reach for that, to even think about it, but do it. So fun fact corner. The word behind Job's redeemer carries the idea of a Goel, 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 which is a person who could act on behalf of a relative to defend family rights, restore what was lost, or seek justice. So Job is not merely saying someone out there likes me. He is expressing confidence that he has a living defender who can ultimately take up his case. And the fact that this declaration appears in Job's darkest season make it even more powerful. Also, Job wanted his words permanently recorded. Congratulations. That's a very like fun, like, yeah, that's a win for me. For him, a win for me too. They made the Bible. That is fairly permanent, I must say. Yeah, all right. Job chapter 20. So we just experienced Job 19. Job has poured out his heart. He begged his friends for compassion. He described being abandoned by basically everybody. Then he made this incredible declaration that his Redeemer lives. So naturally, Zophar responds with empathy. Just kidding. Have we learned nothing? They're the worst friends. They're the worst people. I should not even call them friends. They're the worst people. Whatever. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, Zophar begins the chapter basically saying Job's words offended him. What are you, a Gen Z? Job's words offended him and he feels compelled to respond like, Sir, Job said his skin is barely hanging onto his bones and somehow you are the injured party. Oh my goodness. They're narcissists. Period. Human beings really have remained consistent throughout history, though, because there's a lot of people like that these days. Zophar says that from ancient times, everybody knows the triumph of the wicked is brief. A wicked person might rise high, but eventually he disappears. People who knew him ask where he went. His children must make restitution to the poor. His youthful strength goes with him to the grave. Then Zophar changes imagery. He describes evil as something sweet in the mouth. The wicked person enjoys it, keeps it under his tongue, does not want to let it go, but once swallowed, the sweetness becomes sour. It turns poisonous inside him. This is actually powerful imagery. Sin often advertises itself as sweet. If sin showed up looking like destruction, nobody would want it. Temptation says this will satisfy you. This will make you happy. Nobody will know. You deserve this just once. Whatever. Then eventually the sweetness turns bitter. Zophar says the wicked swallow wealth, but eventually must spit it back out. Riches cannot save them. He compares the consequences of evil to poison. Then he assumes the wicked person of oppressing the poor, abandoning them, and taking houses he did not build. And remember, Zophar is clearly aiming all this at Job. There is just one tiny inconvenience. There is no evidence Job did any of this. None. Zophar has moved from you must have sinned to let me create a possible sin portfolio for you. This is what happens when people become committed to their theory instead of committed truth. And at this point, they probably believe what they're saying, right? If reality does not match the story, they start forcing reality into it. So Zophar continues, the wicked person is never satisfied. His appetite never stops. His treasures cannot rescue him. Even during prosperity, distress catches him. Then Zophar, describes God pouring anger upon wicked. If the man escapes one weapon, another gets him. He cannot outrun judgment. Darkness awaits his treasure, fire consumes what remains, the heavens expose his guilt, the earth rises against him, his household possessions disappear under divine wrath. And Zophar closes by saying, this is the destiny God assigns to the wicked. Now again, think about Job. He literally has nothing left at all. And Zophar has intentionally described himself that, resemble Job's disaster and then labeled them the judgment of a wicked man. His conclusion is obvious. Job, this is you. But Zophar is wrong, painfully wrong. Ironically, many things Zophar says about wickedness are generally true. Sin does not ultimately win. Wealth cannot save anyone from God. Evil eventually produces destruction. God will judge wickedness. But the moment Zophar describes these truths prove Job's guilt, everything collapses. And this is Zophar's final recorded speech in Job. He has confidently explained Job's life in his opinion. Meanwhile, he knows absolutely nothing about the heavenly conversation that started the entire story. That should humble us. We see circumstances, God sees the story. We see a chapter, God sees beginning, middle, and end. We see what happened, He knows why. And sometimes wisdom means admitting, I don't know, right? So, yeah, fun fact corner. Do I have a fun fact corner? See, so this chapter is Zophar's second and final speech recorded in the book. And notice something interesting. His speech contains almost no room for restoration. His wicked person sins, gains temporary pleasure, gets judged, loses everything, and that is basically the end. That harsh framework helps explain why Zophar cannot understand Job. And that explains to me that he's not really a friend. Um, the problem is not simply that Zophar believes God judges evil. The Bible absolutely teaches that, right? The problem is that Zophar thinks he knows exactly when, how, and why God's judgment is operating in someone else's life. So here we are. Yeah. Wow. That was something, huh? So what happens in chapter 21? For the next episode, Job is going to drag that inconvenient fact directly into the conversation. Because if their entire argument is, bad things happen to bad people, Job is about to ask, then explains all the bad people having a fantastic Tuesday. And suddenly the theology of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar is about to get very uncomfortable. And that, Bible nerds, is Job chapters 16 through 20. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for hanging out with me on another episode of Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye, where we study scripture, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. You know, until next time, keep reading your Bible, keep asking questions, keep growing in your relationship with God. And please, for the love of biblical friendship, if somebody is grieving, maybe bring food and not lecture. Peace.